I'm Heather from booktubes, and today is my December reading wrap-up. So I had a rough month in December, sickness and other various issues. So even with Christmas and being excited for the holidays and all the things, it was still a really rough month. And sometimes when things aren't going well, you read a ton of books to pretend like life isn't happening. And sometimes you don't get a lot of reading done, and that's what happened in December. So I read 11 books, IDNF 2. I'm going to talk about 9. 3 of those are rereads. So, you know, this might not be the most interesting wrap up. Hopefully it is still good enough. But yeah, just it wasn't a normal month, and that's okay. So as always, this goes in chronological order. If they're available in Kindle Unlimited, they're marked in the description. So the first one I read was Meet Cute, the Hedgehog Incident, which is Parasol Protectorate 0.75 by Gail Carriger. I gave this 4 stars. This is the meet cute of the main couple of the series, and honestly, it's like really hinted at in the first book, and this novella that explained it didn't really quite live up to my expectations. It was still good. There was like nothing wrong with it, but I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. Then I reread Soulless, which is book 1 in the Parasol Protectorate series, and I gave this 5 stars. This is an all-time favorite. This is a book that has really lived in my memory. I had forgotten a decent amount, enough to make the reread enjoyable, but I also remembered quite a bit of detail, which I haven't read it in years, so that was impressive. So we have a Scottish werewolf who is an earl, and he is also an inspector in like this paranormal division, and he's the alpha of the local werewolf pack, and he's a really powerful alpha, like much more powerful than average, right? And then our main character is a soulless, so she actually does not have a soul. So in this world, they believe that being a paranormal is because you have too much soul, so you're able to turn. So most people don't survive being turned into werewolves or vampires, but those that do, they tend to be artists, actors, writers, those type of things. People who are very creative as an expression of their extra soul. Well, the soulless is the opposite of that. It's someone with no soul whatsoever. And she's also half Italian, and it's like a Victorian steampunk paranormal era. So one of the things that is referenced a lot is kind of colorism, although not in a, I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but more like in the Victorian white sense, where, you know, they always had the parasols and freckles were horrible, and any sort of tan, any sort of indication that sun has ever touched you is unfashionable. And of course they're in England, and her being Italian, her being darker than the average English person, even though she's half Italian, half English, how dark can she be? You know, so there's a lot of comments about that, so I feel like it could definitely bother you, right? It could definitely rub you the wrong way. It could take a lot of the enjoyment out of the book if that is something that you just don't want to read about. So be aware of that. But she is like 27 or something like that, is a spinster. She's large, and her mother really never tried to marry her off. She kind of put her on the shelf at like 15. But the alpha werewolf is like, loves everything about her. He can't believe that she's not married. He doesn't understand what's wrong with all these people, and they, you know, are like, well, there's quite a few unfashionable things about her, and he's just like, what's wrong with you people? So that's kind of interesting. This book specifically, they are kind of enemies to lovers. They're a little bit antagonistic, and there's a lot of steamy tension, a little bit kind of dubious consent with the kissing scenes and stuff, but like within my comfort realm for reading it. And when she touches, I don't know if I got to this is a mess, oh my god. Okay, so because she is soulless, she is kind of or in the past, her people were hunters of paranormals, but she is a neutralizer. So while she's touching you, you don't have your paranormal powers. You're mortal, your strength is gone, you can't change form, vampires don't have their fangs, all the things. She completely turns you back to a human, right? So the werewolves are forced to change at the full moon, like there's stuff like that. So there's this whole thing where there's this conspiracy, and like they're captured and it's the full moon, and he's a wolf who is out of his mind, like he can't rationalize anything or stop himself from anything, but she is able to touch him and turn him back to a man, which turns him into a naked man, and they have to like stay touching in like this prison cell type thing so he doesn't turn into a wolf and eat her. And it's just a great scene. I have remembered this scene happening all these years, and it's just really good. So I feel like if you like that steamy tension and the forced proximity, it's a really good version of it. It's like you said, it's like paranormal, steampunky, Victorian style, and it's just really enjoyable. The cover also terrible. I understand. The cover's terrible. I would never read it based on the cover, but just ignore that and listen to me, because I'm telling you it's really good. I do think the only thing that might particularly bother you is the comments on, like, colorist type comments. That's like the best way I know to categorize it. Then I read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. I gave this 4 stars. This book is just as good as her other books, except this is a young adult book and there's absolutely no romance in it. So if you have a teen or a young reader, or even just personal preference, if you don't want any romance in your fantasy book, I think that this would be a perfect book, especially because it really is written for a teen audience. The main character is 14, her sidekick is 10. Like, it's written for the younger teens, and we need more of that, and this is a really good version of that. It did what I was trying to do. I really enjoyed it, but for me and my taste and preferences, I obviously didn't enjoy it quite as much as her fantasy romance that I've read, right? So we have a baker who is a wizard. She's a baker apprentice. Her aunt is the baker, and she has magic. She can make gingerbread dance, and she can do anything with dough, really. But so it's a small magic. It's an unimportant magic, and she gets brought into a murder plot, and it seems that wizards all over the city are disappearing and have been for months, and the city is no longer safe for magic users. And there's this whole big commentary and this conspiracy and these shenanigans. Of course, they end up getting dragged into everything. But there's all this commentary about how if the adults who in power had done what they were supposed to do, this would be a non-issue. But they didn't. And now people who shouldn't have to save the day, who shouldn't have to be heroes, are having to do things that they shouldn't have to do if other people just did what they were supposed to. So that was really interesting. Also, it kind of challenges the idea of the hero and like the military hero and, all these things. It was just really interesting commentary. Funny, delightful, all the things that T. Kingfisher is writing is, but done for a younger audience, and I thought really did that to perfection, did exactly what it was trying to do. Also, even though it's about gingerbread and the cover and stuff, it's not a Christmas or a holiday book at all. It just isn't, but she does do gingerbread men. Also, content warning for a dead teenager at the beginning of the book, and the sidekick is her little brother, like the dead girl's brother. So obviously there's some grief. It's not really delved into. He's not our main character, and he's a street rat, so he's used to people that he loves not making it a majority. However, it's definitely still a content warning that you should be aware of. Then I have the current anthology for Jackson, Mississippi. I read Dria Andersen's entry, which is Alpha Lover Friend. I gave this 4 stars. This is obviously friends to lovers, which is not my favorite trope, but it's childhood friends to lovers. He is a lion shifter, and he is the alpha of his pride. I don't think they call it alpha, but he is, you know, and she knows about the lines existing. She's his mate, but he's having trouble figuring that out because he's just like recently having those instincts. And also he was raised outside the pride because his mother died and his father was kind of driven mad by losing his mate and did a lot of kind of bad choices because of that. So he doesn't recognize all of the signs. And her mother died, who always interfered when the domestic abuse from his dad got bad. Like, he spent a lot of time at their house and things like that. So a little bit heavier topics, grief and all of that, but still low conflict, still steamy and sweet, just enjoyable, an enjoyable novella. I do want, I'm so bad at reading anthologies, I do kind of want to read at least a couple more entries from this one. And also just a reminder, there's this one and there's part 2. All the proceeds go to charities for Jackson, Mississippi, which is, you know, having a water crisis. And so I would encourage you, if you have the means and the desire and the interest to get these anthologies, go ahead and do it. The authors aren't keeping anything. It's all going to the charities. Then I read Changing Faces, which is Criminal Intention Season 1, Episode 4 by McCade. I gave this 5 stars. Who's surprised? Nobody. This has a content warning for the prologue is in the mind of an abuser. So it's a little difficult. You know, he's thinking awful, horrible things, especially about women, especially about his wife and his daughter. And it's difficult. You could definitely skip it if you wanted to, but just like be aware of that because it's written powerfully enough that it's going to move you, probably, like you're going to be affected by it. So be aware that it's there. And also he does have all the content warnings listed in the front of the book, but your Kindle might open past those, so you might need to scroll back to them if you want the list. So in this one we deal with, why can I never remember their names? Because I can't remember names, that's why. Kajid? The older detective, we're dealing with his ex-wife in this one. We're dealing with the aftermath of a officer shooting that Sejon? I can't remember. I can't remember their names. Anyhow, we're dealing with that from the LAPD, and also we're dealing with that inside their police department because people don't like cops that testify against other cops. And then we're also dealing with doing what's right, whether it's maybe technically the legal thing to do, because the legal system doesn't always get it right and often doesn't. And what is your part in that as part of the legal system? Do you follow the letter of the law, or do you do what you feel is morally right and the thing that you can live with? So that was quite interesting as well. We did a lot of things in this entry. We did a lot of things, and it was really good. Then I read It's Witchcraft, which is Criminal Intentions number 5 by McCade. I gave this 5 stars. We get progress in the relationship. We get more about the side characters. I care so much about these characters. I just want everyone to be okay. And the political situation in the book is really intriguing. Just all the things that they're trying to balance and deal with. Just so good, so good. Loving every minute of it. Then I read Devil in Winter, which is Wallflowers number 3 by Lisa Kleypas. I gave this 3 stars. I know this is a cult favorite. I know Morgan, who just started a booktube channel, she'll be linked in the description. She really loves this book. It's one of her early romance books. And I know that I probably would have enjoyed this more if I did read it a few years ago. Like, just to be honest, I probably would. But I think a lot of this book hinged on the build-up that we had in the previous book. So I really don't think you should read it as a standalone. And then I think that we didn't get a whole lot about these characters. We didn't really delve into them as much, and their conversations and stuff. I mean, it was still really good, but not quite as much as the first 2. But then I did knock a whole star off for racism. So we have a Romani character, and A lot of times they called them a rom or aroma, which I appreciated, but then they would also use the G slur, and it was like, okay, so you know not to use it, but then you're choosing to use it anyways. And I think people do this for historical accuracy, but you don't need racial slurs for historical accuracy. You don't. Have you ever read Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn? Full of racial slurs, and yet you would not write a book today filled with racial slurs like that. And I don't understand why we tried to make the exception for the G slur. Like, you shouldn't use racial slurs. I don't care if your characters would have or not. They're not real people. They're characters that you're writing. Now, this was written 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even known that that was a racial slur. So you do have to give some credit there as well, right? Like, I wouldn't have known. I would have read it with no issue. But now I do know, and now I do notice it. And also, I think that the author was trying to do good representation, but I feel like she really did fall short of that. You know, he was described as exotic a lot, and just like, it was a bit weird. It was a bit weird for me and where I'm at on my anti-racist journey, you know. It stood out to me. Like, I was like, ugh. Ugh. So that definitely did affect my enjoyment of the book and my overall rating. And like I said, if I had read it years ago, wouldn't have bothered me. I wouldn't have known. I didn't know that it was a slur, so I would have been fine. But reading it today, it did. So besides that, the actual plot and the couple, it was interesting. He's kind of the bad guy, and she has a stutter and is the quietest of the Wallflowers that we are following the group getting married. I think some people were really bothered by him instantly caring about her, but for me, like, that works great. You don't need to be mean to her for me to buy that you're a bad guy. Like, I don't know. I really did like their interactions. He was definitely very alpha and like, no, I'm in charge now and this is what you're gonna do. And she didn't love that, and I wouldn't love that. I didn't mind them as a couple. I enjoyed them as a couple, just not quite as much as the previous two. And maybe not quite as much as I thought I would. Then I read, to my children, have been for months, Searching for Dragons, which is Enchanted Forest Chronicles #2 by Patricia C. Wrede. I gave this 5 stars. This is an all-time favorite from my childhood. And this follows Princess Cimarron, who in the first book went to live with the dragons because she's not a proper princess. And in this book, she meets the king of the Enchanted Forest because Kazul, the king of the dragons, is missing. And so they go on an adventure, including giants and Rumpelstiltskin's great-grandson and a magician and, you know, all sorts of cool stuff. I will say the G slur was used in this book once, and I talked to my kids about it and how we shouldn't use that word. I did appreciate that even though it was like the guy's name, part of the guy's name, you know, it was only used once. And again, this book was written several years ago, so probably wouldn't be written in there today, you know, just so you know. But really delightful. There's a romance between Cimarron and the King of the Enchanted Forest, and my kids were really rooting for it, and they were so excited when it happened, and that was fun for me to watch. I thought that was really cute. Then I reread Magic Bites, which is Kate Daniels' #1 by Ilona Andrews. This is my last book of the year, obviously 5 stars. I just love Kate and Curran. I skimmed a lot of the world building and just, you know, read the character interactions and the parts that I was interested in, and just, I needed a comfort read, and this was it. Hello, editing me to say that the G slur is also used in this first Kate Daniels book one time, and also like fat-phobic comments and things like that, which that's not present in any of their later books. This one is from a long time ago, and it's obvious that they have stopped using those things in their writing, but 3 books in a row use the G slur, so that's pretty wild. And I really enjoyed it. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. Here, kitty kitty. I love their meet cute. I love their relationship. I love the antagonism between them. I love the way that Kate specifically really grows as a character. Curran too. The difference between these two from the beginning of the series to the end is massive. And I love that. You're starting with them as adults. You're starting them with already an understanding of who they are and with a significant amount of power, and yet the way that they grow and mature throughout the series and learn to deal with situations better is really impressive. And I love it. So I've been wanting to read it for months, and I finally just did. Even though I knew I was going to read 2 Alona Andrews books at least in January, I was like, you know, I don't care. I'm just going to do it. So I did. I didn't read any holiday books, any of the anticipated releases. Just a weird month, and yet still things that I really enjoyed. So we're going to call it a win, and that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.